But in the 1970s, China put a lot of investment into reviving their traditional Chinese medicine. And one of the things that came in, they started researching and saying, okay, well, pine pollen is here. It's been mentioned for, its ability to nourish qi, which is energy and vitality. It resolves dampness, which is the slowness and the loss of hormones that leads into the sagging of the tissue or inflammation and congestion. It's good for the lung and the heart meridian. Why is it that we don't have access to it? Let's figure out how to harvest it and commercialize it. One of the cool things about pollen is, if you dive deeper into the biochemistry of it and the actual cell, it's a live cell, right? It's the tree's germ cell. It's if you may, it's the sperm of the pine tree or the forest, right?
Oh, that's interesting.
So it's carrying a lot of nutrients in there to be able to germinate and replicate when it's ready to, in a way, impregnate the pine seed to make pine nuts. So because of that, it has a lot of enzymes. And a couple of those enzymes, there is some really cool research with it lately that show they can actually even trigger germ cells. Which are the pluripotent primal cells that can actually regenerate, right? But I wanted something that I could trust. I wanted something for myself. Like, I started taking it for myself, and the first impact I noticed in me was my sleep was more regenerative. Which
the sleep?
Yeah, which technically means, like, I'm getting a better cortisol regulation. Now, coming back to pine pollen, another cool thing about it is that it reduces blood sugar. Not only that, they did a cardiovascular study, human trial this time, and looked at its ability to improve circulation and reduce lipids, and it does that as well. So, like, increased circulation translates to improvement in healing.
Cures, Remedies, and Beyond podcast with Dr. Irina, a Stanford-trained medical doctor, inventor, and a published author with over 30 years of clinical experience, is bringing together the science of medicine and the art of healing for ultimate vitality and health. It engages in discussions with healthcare providers, wellness experts, innovators, philosophers, spiritual and industry leaders, as well as health and wisdom seekers to provide you, the listeners, with practical tips and knowledge to help optimize your health and well-being. The Cures, Remedies, and Beyond podcast with Dr. Irina.
Welcome to the show. Today we're discussing longevity. In particular, some natural approaches to longevity. And that's why we invited Dr. Saeid Mushtagh, a naturopathic doctor specializing in functional medicine, anti-aging, hormonal rebalancing, brain and cognitive health, along with nutritional support for health and healing. Thank you for joining us today, Dr. Saeid.
Thanks so much for having me.
In addition to your clinical practice in Vancouver, Canada, you're also a co-founder of a Canadian-based Canadian pine pollen company. And you guys specialize in the wild harvesting of medicinal herbs and other healing botanicals like pine pollen. Recently, there has been a surge of interest in this unique superfood, and mostly due to its a relatively potent phytoandrogen properties, meaning that the pine pollen contains plant-based substances with a structure resembling human hormones like testosterone and DHEA. But I also understand that pine pollen's history traces back to ancient times, and particularly in traditional Chinese medicine, where it was used for various illnesses and believed to enhance qi or energy and extending lifespan. Would you tell us, please, Dr. Saeid, what exactly is pine pollen and what is it about it that received such a hype recently?
Yeah, for sure. So pine pollen has got a very interesting background and story, but also our company, Canadian Pine Pollen Company, it's got its own story. When I first set up my first practice as a naturopathic doctor, I moved to the Northwest Territories, which was one of the unregulated provinces in Canada. And one of the early adopters, one of my like third patient, has is now my business partner in Canadian pine pollen. And the story with that is, he was one of the early adopters. He was one of the ones that was always coming to me asking me about, what can I do for my health? Um, how do I help it? How do I what is the supplements do I need? How do I detox and whatnot? And over the years, he had come with different ideas of supplements and nutrients that he thought could make a good business idea. And to be frank, there's so many different things in the market from so many brands that it never interested me. And then one day he came to me and asked me about pine pollen. This is fast forward 10 years after I'd met him, and I didn't know much about it. You know, in the materia medica of naturopathic medicine, you're thought about 200-300 different herbs, and then in the homeopathic materia medica, you're thought about 2,000 different homeopathic remedies, plants. And I knew of pine, but I didn't know of pine pollen per se. So I started to read and dive deeper into what it was. And the story of pine pollen is that it goes back 2,000 years. Like the earliest uh, references to it, mentionings go back to Chinese medicine textbooks. There is actually a Russian novel, Anastasia, that talks about a wrestler that used pine pollen and he was never defeated. So
Really?
there's anecdotal references to it. And then the First Nations of the Canadian First Nations used it ceremonially. The thing about it is that it's only on the trees for about 3 to 6 weeks out of the year. So even though it was 2,000 years ago mentioned in Chinese medicine, it didn't have much access or availability in the market. And
why is that? Because it's really relatively hard to harvest, or?
Yeah, so there's, you can walk up to a tree and you can shake it and get the pollen from it, or you can pick the buds and lay them out and dry and extract the pollen. No matter what you do, that window within a year is very limited window. It's roughly about 3 weeks that the male cones stay on the tree. After that, they pollinate and fall. And during that 3 weeks, only about a 3-day span where they are pollinating. So you have to show up and scout different land space and landscapes in order to be there on time to actually pick it. So I think because of that reason, and also because of the Chinese medicine's post-communist agenda of suppressing traditional Chinese medicine in favor of conventional medicine, pine pollen became really a footnote in what you see in the stores. Some brands carried it, and that was it. But in the 1970s, China put a lot of investment into reviving their traditional Chinese medicine. And one of the things that came in, they started researching and saying, okay, well, pine pollen is here. It's been mentioned for, its ability to nourish qi, which is energy and vitality. It resolves dampness, which is the slowness and the loss of hormones that leads into the sagging of the tissue or inflammation and congestion. It's good for the lung and the heart meridian. Why is it that we don't have access to it? Let's figure out how to harvest it and commercialize it and turn it into a commodity. So starting the 70s, then two government-based companies came into existence with that project in China that started bringing pollen to the market. And first, when I heard from it from my business partner, I started taking for myself and I started giving it out to my patients, especially the ones that had an idea of a hormone imbalance or estrogen dominance. But then I realized it wasn't available. Like I couldn't find a non-Chinese source, and
Mhm.
you know,
And you
not
didn't trust the quality, basically, as you said, of
yeah,
Chinese
no, I
sourcing
mean,
necessarily.
yeah, I don't want to make a blanket statement and say that something about the Chinese product as a whole, uh, but the reality is, uh, a lot of the herbs, especially when they come in the powder form, are prone to adulteration, and unfortunately, the Chinese um, haven't established a good reputation as a whole. Some companies, you can work with them, and you can do your due diligence and finally attain a good product. But I wanted something that I could trust. I wanted something for myself. Like I started taking it for myself, and the first impact I noticed in me was um, my sleep was more regenerative,
Really,
which
the sleep.
technically,
Huh.
yeah, which technically means like I'm getting a better cortisol regulation, right, from it. Um,
Oh,
it-
that's the mechanism, underlying mechanism for sleep improvement with pine pollen.
with sleep improvement, yeah, that's most likely what it's doing. It's
Interesting.
improving the hormone regulation, the HPA axis regulation, because it's an amphoteric hormone regulator. So like if your hormones are up in one level, it can bring it down. If they're down, it can bring it up. It can have a balancing effect. And at a time when I started this was 6 years ago, so I was 41. So I was just like, I was I was I was plateauing at my prime, and it would be a road down. I hadn't noticed anything like aging related yet. All right, it usually is in the 40s and the 50s, the midlife, that you notice that, oh, my recovery is not the same, my movement is not the same, um, my mood is not the same, my cognition is not the same. So I hadn't
The,
noticed it, but so I didn't have any symptoms to go by to say that, let's say, I have um, increased frequency, which is one of the first things that men notice with the aging process and hormone imbalance.
because
Um,
of the, of course, yeah, enlargement of the prostate
yeah,
that starts happening, right?
yeah, absolutely. But the first thing I noticed for myself was that I could get away with half an hour less sleep and feel just as energetic and fresh the next day. So that's really the background story of pine pollen and how I stumbled on it. It was a kind of like a wow aha moment of wow, like how come there is, like, we have so much pine in Canadian forest, and pine is got such a history with human civilization. Like it kind of like overlaps. It's one of the ancient trees that's always been, revered and magnified in some cultures as well. So it was super cool to find this process.
Hmm. Yeah, that is really remarkable.
Excuse me.
And you mentioned that even Chinese started going back into their traditional Chinese medicine, which is, of course, a couple of 1,000 years plus. And I also read that they mentioned the pine pollen, so as early as 600 AD in their equivalent of Materia Medica. And I was curious to read that actually they used it not only internally as a medicinal food, but they used it topically, so for different skin ailments, for psoriasis, eczema, so even diaper rashes, and things like that. So, and I actually came across a recent article published, of course, by Chinese scientists, that they did a unique testing of the pine pollen on the human cells. So it was in vitro studies on human cells, and they were, of course, checking on the different biomarkers. So for longevity, senescence, of course, and some other additional life expansion and extension markers. So, and surprisingly, they actually found that pine pollen really worked well, not only on the petri dish of the specific cell culture, but they also carried further this experiment on animal model. And they found that they actually had significant decrease in the inflammatory biomarkers like interleukin-6, TNF-alpha. So, and of course, those are the pro-inflammatory markers, as we know. And of course, current understanding of what aging is, it's basically inflammaging, as we call it, right? So, and through the decrease in the inflammation, so we actually have more natural increase in the lifespan. So, yeah, I found it quite interesting that they are doing now very interesting research in that particular arena, showing in real bench study that there is a life extension happens just due to the simple supplement or nutritional food. So yeah, as a
absolutely.
super
One of the cool things about pollen is if you dive deeper into the biochemistry of it and the actual cell, it's a live cell, right? It's the tree's germ cell. It's if you may, it's the sperm of the pine tree or the forest, right?
Oh, that's interesting.
So it's carrying a lot of nutrients in there to be able to germinate and replicate when it's ready to, in a way, impregnate the pine seed to make pine nuts. So because of that, it has a lot of enzymes, and a couple of those enzymes, there is some really cool research with it lately that show they can actually even trigger germ cells. So which are the pluripotent primal cells that can actually regenerate, right? So it has gibberellins and it has auxins, and these are now they're finding a lot of germinating tissue have these. So you know how they say sprouts are good for you. Sprouts have a lot of these compounds. So and they help with that aspect of anti-aging as well. The other thing that's that's interesting with the anti-aging effect of it, it's interesting you mentioned inflammation. One of the most inflammatory things in diet is high blood sugar. When your blood sugar is high, that sugar is acidifying the blood. It's binding to the hemoglobin. It's lowering the oxygen delivery capacity of the body, and all of that is creating this this toxic load and inflammatory load, because to resolve inflammation you need oxygen. Like when it comes to anti-aging, one of the best things about it that helps is hyperbaric oxygen therapy. Because it does that. It delivers oxygen at such levels that the tissue starts regenerating. And now coming back to pine pollen, another cool thing about it is that it reduces blood sugar. Not only that, they did a cardiovascular study, human trial this time, and looked at its ability to improve circulation and reduce lipids, and it does that as well. So like increased circulation translates to improvement in healing, and that the three hormones, the phytoandrogens, the gibberellins and auxins, and the brassinosteroids, which are really one of the key things about pine pollen. In plants, they work through the nitric oxide pathway of increasing communication. So in human beings, nobody has researched this. This is like we can't say it does that or not, but in human beings, we know they would have a similar mechanism of action on nitric oxide. So that would be a really cool study with pine pollen.
So of course, increasing the nitric oxide decreases blood pressure, can also enhance, your sexual performance, right? So as we know, that's one of the main mechanisms of Viagra. So, and since we're talking about this, phytoandrogens, right? So as what, pollen is, how exactly does it work and help men and women? Because of course, as we age, especially, after 40, 45, so, our hormones start declining. So how does pollen, help with this type of situation?
Yeah. So the way it would work in a male versus a female is not entirely two different things. So phytoandrogens, by nature, they have a similar molecular structure as progesterone and testosterone, versus estrogen, which is a phytoestrogen. Most of the symptoms of aging are an estrogen dominance. The idea is that either because of the progesterone decline, you end up with a high level of estrogen, uh,
Unopposed, as they call, right? So
and
unopposed
unopposed
estrogen.
estrogen, right? And that unopposed estrogen translates to weight gain, mood changes, cycle changes, um, changes in libido, uh, recovery problems post exercise, and
Muscle
ultimately
mass, right?
muscle mass, yeah, and ultimately andropause and menopause, right? And sometimes it's the aging process, and a lot of times it's the aging process suppressed further with the xenoestrogens in our environment. So like hormone disruptors, things like um,
Plastic constituencies, nanoplastic, microplastic, right? So
yeah,
in the food containers and
yeah,
etc. So
herbicides, colorings, uh, uh, deodorants, nail polish remover, some of the
hmm.
antiseptics on hand creams and hand washes or hand sanitizers. So there's a lot of endocrine disruptors out there, and we tend to be in an estrogen dominant state, which is one of the reasons why breast cancer and prostate cancer, which are both estrogen dominant states, are rampant. So
That's
the
right.
cool thing about pine pollen is it comes in as a phytoandrogen source and balances that unopposed estrogen. So even though you're not going to see like a Viagra like effect on sexuality and libido, or you're not going to be able to see a bioidentical hormone replacement therapy effect in someone who is already gone at the end stages of menopause or andropause. Even though it's not going to be as strong as that, but in the early stages, it's definitely going to be able to manage that unopposed estrogen and balance it out. And the way it works is essentially it's a binding thing. So like as a hormone, you go in and you bind to a receptor site and you trigger a cascade of events. And if you got a xenoestrogen, a foreign estrogen binding to a pocket, preoccupying it, by the nature of being a phytoandrogen or a testosterone, it's got better affinity, comes in, knocks that out, and allows for that cascade to happen. So it does a detoxifying effect, but it also does what a phytoandrogen could do in terms of action and downward cascade of health balancing effect.
Wow. And I understand that you have been using this product that you guys have created, of course, several years ago on your own patients. So do you actually see specific improvements in, let's say, perimenopausal or early menopausal stages for women? So who obviously, losing their muscle mass, they're losing libido, right? So
our typical, so in terms of feedback from our online clients and in terms of my patient practice, there's a few things that stands out. So definitely it's a lifesaver in menopause and andropause as a medicine, especially the tincture form. It's in menopause, it's within a couple of weeks. In the early stages where hot flashes are there, it starts showing effect. Women, some of them swear by it. They call it the youth serum. And it
what
really,
kind of serum?
the youth serum.
The youth serum. I
Yeah.
like that.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's a good name.
It's been called the pre-workout buddy. So the younger crowds take it to work out. You can take it beforehand to increase that boost. So it definitely, it's a sure medicine. Now, in my own practice, my complaints with a lot of the aspects of patient interaction is that a lot of times patients come too late. They come when they've been worn down and everything's gone down, and they've tried medications, and they have explored the conventional path, and instead of like preventing and learning to self-heal and avoid some of the things that hastens and makes that aging a lot faster, instead of preventing that a decade ago or two decades ago, they come in when things are in a disease stage. So in situations like that, a lot of times you have to do multiple interventions in order to create health. So you got to take into account the mental state, you got to take into account the emotional state, the hormonal state, the toxic state. So I find often I do 3-4 things for a patient. And if someone is got in a menopausal or andropausal patient that comes in over the age of 40 or 50, I always use one of those 4 or 5 things is always pine pollen. So I definitely, since I discovered it and since I incorporated it into my practice, it's made the process of dealing with menopausal patients a lot easier, because it used to be that I had to mix and combine multiple herbs into a tincture form in order to achieve the progesterone balance in estrogen dominant state and phytoandrogen or androgen deficient state with combining the herbs. But now it's a lot simpler. I put them on pine pollen and I get them to do a couple of basic health related foundations that, if you step back, if they don't do it, I would say maybe the pine pollen is not going to be effective. And here I'll give you the reason, and I'll actually share those couple of things. So the reason with hormone imbalance, like I said, is stepping back. It's always a cortisol dominance, and that cortisol, too much hypothalamic pituitary adrenal activity, whether it's because of the toxics or because of the estrogen dominance, the cortisol is too much, the inflammation is building up. And in a menopausal state, it's a similar thing. If you bring just the cortisol down, the nervous system can self-regulate better, and it will regulate the hormones better. But if your cortisol is high, you can take in supplements and nutrients for the hormones. The cortisol doesn't necessarily allow the impact to be seen. So one tip is, which I always ask all my menopausal patients, is to go off coffee. I mean, it's for some of your listeners, this might sound like, wow, too much, but coffee is one of the first things that plays around with the diurnal biphasic rhythm of your cortisol. So if you got coffee, if you're putting demand on your adrenal gland by stimulating it with something, well, you can't necessarily heal it, right? So the second thing I take them off is sugars, refined sugars. So just
basically,
those two things.
Right. What you're saying is that we cannot rely just on the pine pollen to fix everything, right? So, of course, you have to have a comprehensive approach, especially, as you said, that, somebody is not necessarily took good care of, his or her body. So, yeah, you have to, of course, adjust and change the lifestyle and many other aspects, to gain, of course, the healthier, less toxic inner environment. So that's all working synergistically. And of course, pine pollen is just, by some considered just a medicinal food, right? So there's so much you can expect from that medicinal food. So, and it was really interesting that you mentioned with the cortisol, because of course, our adrenal glands, so secrete the all these stress hormones, as we call them, right? So adrenaline, cortisol. So, and so some people might not know that the original substrate or the building blocks from what all this chain of hormonal synthesis happens in the body. So if your stress level is high, if your cortisol is high, so all of that goes towards supporting that cortisol level. So, and it basically creates a stealing effect from specific pathways. That same substrate is needed for the estrogen, and testosterone and the DHEA production, right? So the more stressed you are, so the less actually your natural production of the hormones you have, so just because of that. So,
Yeah.
and so I really like your approach by, definitely decreasing that high cortisol level, which is good for multiple, of course, reasons. And this one is including, So we're going to take a really quick break. And we will be right back.
This podcast represents the personal views and opinions of the host and the guests and does not constitute medical advice. The statements contained in this podcast have not been evaluated by the FDA. Any products or treatments mentioned are not intended to diagnose, treat, or prevent any disease. And now your host, Dr. Irina.
So I have another question about, you mentioned performance, so about the human athletic performance particularly. So you had mentioned that pollen does help actually recovery time. So, and my understanding is that it has multiple branch chain amino acids like leucine, isoleucine, valine. So, and they're the ones that are necessary for the muscle repair, which was fascinating for me to actually learn. So, and obviously a lot of fitness enthusiasts, that are seeking natural solutions, to enhance their performance and especially recovery time, after particularly high intensity training. So might also benefit from this.
For sure. And they do. Like I was saying, we have had comments online calling the pine pollen their gym buddy. And we've had athletes that had difficulty recovering, which as we age, we all have difficulty recovering. Like a younger athlete generally has a better, faster recovery time, and an older athlete has a less recovery time. And pine pollen is beneficial in that. And the way it's beneficial in that is it has those amino acids, those branch chain amino acids, which are the building blocks. It's really a complete food. But it does it from the hormone aspect as well. There's 3 layers of studies with pine pollen. There's the cellular studies, there's the animal studies, and then there's the human studies. And the cellular studies are crazy. It's like, it looks like it does everything. When you look at it, it's just a magical food because it does help with longevity. It does help with collagen buildup. It does help with muscle mass, muscle cell growth. But the animal studies on muscle growth are cool too, because they do show that it increases muscle mass relative to the fat mass in animals. There hasn't been a study done like that in human beings, but in human beings, it's been tried for, arthritis, and it's been tried for cardiovascular health, blood sugar levels, benign prostatic hyperplasia. But for sure, the feedback across the board we're getting from athletes that are using it is that they can push more iron, they might do more reps, and the recovery time is slower. The recovery time is shorter in span. If they needed to do after like a big push, after a marathon or after a game, or after doing a set of really strong activity, if they needed X number of hours or days, depending on the activity, that number is lower. Or if their healing injury recovery time is lower, which is amazing. It's I think that's one of the areas that it should be studied for. The setup and carrying out such a study. Any human trials take a lot of resources and a number of years to be carried out. So I am not surprised if we see more of these things popping up in the pine pollen world, especially in China, because they are the biggest producer and markets. They have the largest market share of the market in the world. So more studies will be coming up. There's one study that came up that was interesting. This one was an animal study. This is a recent one. They looked at it for treating IBD, irritable bowel disease, and Crohn's and colitis in, again, animal models, and it performs really well. And they think it's because the polysaccharides, the sugars in them, are changing the microbiome of the animals. And if you think about the microbiome, that's like that's the foundation of everything. Like in terms of immune system, we think of that as your hormones, your nervous system as your microbiome, the triad of the three. So it's helping that type of autoimmune condition. Is helping with it is definitely magic in a bottle. If there is anything could be called that when it comes to nature and what it delivers in terms of food and nutrients and herbs.
Right. Wow. That's interesting. And of course, the gut health is, as you said, is foundational. So it's now, gut is like a third brain, so to speak. So
Yeah.
we do need the healthy microbiome for the, not normal and optimal serotonin, of course, production, etc. So, and so which leads me to another question. Actually, you mentioned the cognitive function and brain health. And I know that you actually had delivered a TED talk in Vancouver on the cognitive health, etc. So, and some psychiatric illnesses that you actually treat and had even your own experiences with. So quite impressive. So, but what do you see with the pine pollen in terms of the cognitive memory or some other results?
Yeah. So, the fogginess that we get with age, our memory is not the same. We're not as sharp, or even some of the fogginess that we get from the menstrual cycles and different times of the cycle.
That's true.
And the fogginess that sets in after a lot of post-concussive experiences. At the basis of all of these fogginess, brain fog and slowness, is hormones. Again, it's the brain. The reason I started using pine pollen for cognitive function was one aspect of my practice is helping patients who have had head injuries. And a lot of patients with head injuries end up having low hormones because the hypothalamus, which is the governing center of the hormones, telling the thyroid, the adrenals, or the gonads to do what they need to do, as a result of the jarring and the shaking in the brain and the concussion, becomes underactive because of that stagnant inflammation. So we know as a fact that even up to like 5-6 years after a concussion, the person's testosterone can decline. Their progesterone can become less relative to their estrogen. And there's human trials that show if you take progesterone post-concussion, the odds of recovery is better in older individuals. So there's clear evidence that hormones and concussion go hand in hand. But in my practice, being a naturopathic doctor, I have a limited access to prescriptions. So I can write prescriptions for progesterone for my patients. I can write progesterone, like estrogen or bioidentical forms of them for my patients. But in Canada, testosterone and DHEA are restricted in terms of access. So the reason I started using pine pollen for those patients was exactly the same thing. They need an improvement of outcome for their DHEA and their testosterone to see the improvements and cognitive resiliency, but their brain is post-concussed and they're feeling the fog and they don't have enough of it. So pine pollen, I used it in a combination of things that I do for concussion. I do a few things with concussion. I measure people's brain waves, figure out where the concussion is coming in. We use pulse EMF. We use red light therapy to improve circulation. We balance hormones. We give them neurofeedback for cognitive rehabilitation. But one of the things I do in terms of the hormone balancing aspect is pine pollen in that combination, specifically for the phytoandrogens and the kind of impact it has in balancing the elevations of estrogen to other hormones.
Mm-hmm. I wonder if it also works on decreasing the neuroinflammation, which is, of course, a lot of people experiencing not only due to the direct concussion or trauma, but even in the post-COVID era, as we know, a lot of people also having this unfortunate side effects.
Yeah, possibly. One of the things that's made reference to in connection to pine pollen often is that it looks like the pineal gland. It has some resemblance. The pineal gland is the smallest gland. It has that kind of like, not quite the Mickey Mouse shape, but it's kind of like a pyramidal type shape. So there is that aspect, and the pineal gland being like the gland of aging because it calcifies as you get older, makes less of the hormones and the melatonin, and as a result, the conversion of lower melatonin, you accumulate inflammation, and then inflammation, the hallmark of aging, right? So pine pollen is supportive in that aspect too. It definitely is nature's wonder when it comes to, like I said, I've worked with a lot of herbs, and I have my favorites, and definitely pine pollen is top of the list.
That's interesting. And that brings me to another question, I guess, that I'm sure some of your patients ask. Are there any contraindications? Are there any side effects that, let's say, pine pollen can cause?
Yeah. So the main thing is how much you use it, right? So actually, there's two things. Let's keep that how much you use it in the back burner. The first thing is if you're allergic to pollen, don't use it. That's a no-brainer. There's about 3% of the population that most likely are allergic to pollen. If the common recommendation for them is to do desensitization, maybe from some honey source within their locality, or use the conventional medical desensitizations. But about 3% of the population are going to be sensitive and they can't take it. After first taking it, they might have an allergic reaction. Or if you know you have already pollen allergies and seasonal tree allergies to pollen, there's a chance that you may not. The allergies tend to be less than the allergies to, let's say, bee pollen or pollen from the seasonal pollen from the flowers, because the size of the pine pollen is so much bigger, so it doesn't trigger the mast cells lining the airways as much.
Oh,
it's a bigger
interesting.
size. Yeah. So that's one thing. The other thing is really it comes to a matter of dose, right? So it's a potent functional nutrient. It's a functional food, and the definition of that is a food that's really dense in nutrients and can have health outcomes, right? So like beetroots are functional foods. They have clear health outcomes on your nitric oxide levels, and pine pollen is a functional food, and it's a superfood in that definition by having a high density of plant androgens, antioxidants, good balance of minerals, proteins, vitamins, etc. So it's a functional food in that sense. And as a functional food, the dosage becomes a thing. Like, let's say garlic is not a functional food. How much garlic is safe to have during pregnancy becomes a question. Or chamomile is a functional herb. How much herb do you have during pregnancy becomes a question. So that's another caution thing. So if you're pregnant, you may not want to take pine pollen as a medicine. But if it's, here and there, because traditionally they used it in Korean cooking, they used it in like little pastries. So like if you have a little pastry of pine pollen here and there, that's not a contraindication. That's not an absolute contraindication. The same thing that we say, like even with something like turmeric, high dose of turmeric during pregnancy may be contraindicated, but turmeric in your food traditionally has been used in a lot of cultures. So pine pollen is a similar thing. It's got a food status, so it's pretty safe for children, adults, but in pregnancy there's always a cautionary note associated with it.
Yeah, that makes total sense. So basically, how would you suggest people to use pine pollen? I understand you have two different forms. One is in this original form as a dry pollen, so in a jar, right? So I don't know if you have the jar
actually
to show us by any chance.
Yeah, give me a second. I'll grab a jar. I neglect. I have them handy here. Hold on a second.
Okay. So yeah, Dr. Said, show us different types of your product, because I understand you have different types of pine pollen
Yeah.
itself. So, and you have like a dry format, the original dry pollen, and you have a tincture and etc. So yeah, if you could share, what do you guys have?
So for sure, yeah, we actually make two categories of products. One is the powder, which you'll see it's a very free flowing product because all the grains are the same, and this is the type that the bulk of the clinical trials have been done with in taking the powder, and the dose for that is typically a half a teaspoon 2 to 3 times a day. So about a half a teaspoon to 1.5 teaspoon. It would with powder the higher dose, which would be 1.5, like three half teaspoons, one point or 7.5 teaspoon. uh, However you mentioned that 0.25 mils, half a teaspoon. Three of that would be 1.5 teaspoon. Typically, that's the dose that you're going to see an impact from. You need more pollen to see the clinical impact. The reason behind that is, in terms of absorption, about 60% of the pollen is going to be absorbed. The rest, the other 40%, is going to be chewed up by the gut microbiome, which they're going to love it. So you do get a lot of impact with this, but to notice andropausal menopausal impact from it, a higher dose is needed, around 1.5 teaspoon. And we make these in two sizes. The 70 gram that roughly lasts about a month, and this one is just more of a trial size, 30 gram, for someone to see an impact from. And then we also make a tincture, which is an alcoholic extract. So with an alcoholic extract, the beauty is you take the active ingredients and you use alcohol to capture and preserve those active ingredients. And when it comes to the phytoandrogens and the testosterone aspect, it's a fat soluble molecule, right? So as a fat soluble molecule, when you take it orally and ingest it, it doesn't absorb really well. But with alcohol, you can get quite a bit of sublingual, under the tongue or buccal absorption directly into the bloodstream. So we also make the tinctures. And another thing that is different between the two, we have two different species. If you notice here, we got the pictures of the species on of the bud types on
One
the
is a
bottles,
Ponderosa.
and one is
I
a
see.
lodgepole. Exactly, one is a Ponderosa and one is a lodgepole. And the Ponderosa tends to be a much bigger tree. It grows in warmer climates. It blooms first. It's really an independent tree. It's it grows in small areas where there is a lot of sun and open area around them. And then lodgepole is a higher elevation plant, and it's packed and it's a dense area. And we've done a lot of nutritional analysis on the two, and they're very similar. The Ponderosa being the one that has a little bit more hormones in it, but the lodgepole has a little bit more propolis, which is the natural resin from the trees. So whatever this lacks in hormones, it makes up in propolis. But we've kept them the two the separate, simply because some doctrine of signature. This is more feminine in look, and this is more masculine and more phallic in look. And
That helps to
yeah,
distinguish.
right, to distinguish between the two. And this one is the way you take this one is there's a graduated dropper in there, which tells you exactly what you're taking. And
Sublingual, and you hold it for how many seconds to basically allow the direct absorption, within your mouth, and has.
Yeah, so roughly about 30 seconds to a minute, you hold it in your mouth, and that you'll see it's a burst of alcohol. It's about 38-40% alcohol with a little bit of glycerin. And there's a story about the glycerin and why we use it too, because it captures some of those hormones better than alcohol could or water could. So we run these dual extraction tinctures, and this would be more medicinal impact compared to the powder, which is more nutritional. So this is a functional food. This is definitely a supplement. with medicinal impacts. So you notice a faster improvement, and you need less of a dose, and it's more economic to take the tincture. And typically, this is used at 2 milliliters, so 2 of these
dropperfuls,
2 to 3 times a day.
Okay. And then I have a question. I wonder if people who might have some allergy to actual pollen might do better with this tincture. Have you seen,
there is a chance
people tolerate it better?
There is a chance, but the tincturing process that we do takes everything out of the pollen and concentrates it. So it concentrates the proteins. So some of the storage proteins in the pollen are the ones that are responsible for trigger. So the tincture will have that. It will bring in all the polysaccharides, the sugars. So if you're allergic to that component, it will have that. And it will bring in the phytoandrogens. So what is left after making the tincture is just essentially empty. Like it's the equivalent of taking a juice out of your carrots. And if you're allergic to carrots, you're going to be allergic to carrot juice too. So the tincture is just similar. It's got a disclaimer on it saying that if you're pregnant, don't take it, and if you're allergic to pollen, don't take it. But I do think, again, it's all about the dosage. The dose is what makes the medicine. So even if you're allergic to pollen, you can use very, very low doses of pollen as a way of desensitizing yourself to pollen, which is typically available to you in a local honey form that you have.
Okay, and it's always, of course, advisable to start with the lowest dose possible, and then titrate it forward to make sure you allow a few days, so that sometimes there is a little bit delayed reaction. So for safety reason,
Yeah, and also, like, if you don't notice an improvement with 2 mils twice a day after a couple of weeks, you can take that up to 2 mils 3 times a day. There is another product that we have, which is a gold label of these two, which is a mixture of the two pollen. That gold label is 50% Lodgepole, 50% Ponderosa, because again, it's like, okay, it's a shame to leave behind the propolis effect of this, which is anti-inflammatory and also get the benefit
antibacterial, antiviral, right?
Yeah.
So yes,
and
we
then
know
get the
propolis.
benefit of the elevated testosterone. We've made this, and we have made it 40% more strong, so 50% stronger. So this is like 150% of one of these bottles in potency. And this one, we got the dosage for the maximal allowable Chinese medicine dose, and that's 2 to 4 mils 1 to 3 times a day. So if you take 4 mils 3 times a day, that's 12 milliliters. That's a huge dose. So for someone who is in the early andropause, early menopause, early aging state, they will notice an impact by taking 2 mils twice a day. But for someone who is later on, they might have to go with a much higher dose to achieve that change.
Yeah. And do you take it after food, before food, or does it matter?
Usually on an empty stomach before food is the best time for tincture. And then with the pollen, the best way to take it is some warm drink. So add it to tea. If you're drinking, if you're healthy, you don't have any problems, and you're doing 1 to 2 times coffee a day, then in your like a week, 1 to 2 times coffee a week, then you can add it to your coffee. But in a warm drink would be the preferred way. But it lends itself very well to any other form. Like you can put it in water and just take it. But empty stomach is the best way to take them.
Mm-hmm. And you can mix it with your smoothie or.
The powder. It blends well into everything. You can mix it with smoothie. You can make it in your recipe. You can just pour it on your porridge or mix it with your peanut butter. However you want to take it, you can take it. The less food there is in your system, though, the better results you're going to get from it.
Mm-hmm. Or use it as a little cake, as you said, the Koreans use. That's interesting. I didn't know that. Yeah, that has been used.
It's got such an amazing aroma when you bake it. That's where you actually, the powder, you smell this powder, there isn't much to it, and you taste it, there isn't much to it. But when you actually bake it, that's where the aroma starts coming out.
Wow, I didn't know that. So you can actually cook with it. So, and there is no problem. It's not going to be deactivated with heat, right?
No, the heat is necessary, in fact, for releasing the heat. It's a two-edged sword. The heat is needed for getting some of the polysaccharides or the sugars, but it has an impact on the polyphenols and the phytoandrogens by reducing them. So what we do with the tincture, really the tincture is like a state-of-the-art extraction. What we do with the tincture is we soak the powder in alcohol, in organic cane alcohol, and we press out whatever comes in as a first step. We keep that aside, and then we put the leftover pulp with a lot more water, some glycerin, and we put it in a tank with ultrasonic rods. And the rods generate heat, local heat, and it brings it up to about 80 degrees, which is what is needed to knock off those sugars from it. And then we take that fluid and concentrate it down to a very concentrate form, and then add it back to that first alcoholic extract. So you end up with a dual extraction. So the first alcohol extract, which pulled all the testosterone there out, so now you're not damaging it with heat. And then the second extract, which pulled all the sugars which needed the heat, and you concentrate it back together. So the dual extraction gives you that full benefit of the testosterone. But if you were to cook this, obviously you're damaging some of the
constituents.
Yeah, some of the heat sensitive constituents for sure.
Wow, that is wonderful to hear about your unique products, I have to say. So, and I started taking it myself. So I have to say that I'm feeling more energy. So I do think it affects libido, and my family started taking it too and noticed some results. So, but I like that it's a relatively safe product. It's natural, right? So, and it's really makes me feel more energized, I have to say. So I actually noticed that I don't have to sleep as long. So yeah,
sleep recovery is definitely that was one of the main things. And like you said, libido for sure. It's you just feel that little bounce again in your feet, and it's just a sense of wellness that you get from it. Like, you know, it's almost like being able to like travel in time with your age backwards 5, 6, 7 years in terms of what you remember from your the health of your body. So that's a cool thing.
Wow, that's interesting. Yeah, especially it has such a, long traditional use, like you said, in China, Korea. So yeah, are there any patients that or people that you think should not particularly consider it? So aside from allergy, any other contraindications?
There isn't any other contraindications. Like it's we thought about it's a phytoandrogen. So being a phytoandrogen of in itself, that's like that plant protection. It doesn't have negative effect. It's not like a testosterone injection then that you would say, if you have prostate cancer, definitely don't do it. Or if you have like let's say PCOS, where it's a testosterone dominance, you would say, hey, don't take this because it's got a phytotestosterone in it. Phytotestosterone tends to be balancing on testosterone effect. So it's going to work for someone who's got a hormone imbalance on the extreme and has got PCOS and a testosterone dominance, or estrogen dominance, low testosterone. And it's going to work for someone who is, elevated prostate antigens, and because its impact on DHT and how it can downregulate the effect of testosterone. So it doesn't have a contraindication. Just by nature of being a plant, it's a pretty safe herb. Some herbs have an impact on liver, negative impact in long term. Some herbs are not supposed to be used long term because of the dependence they create. Some herbs are, especially some testosterone herbs, like let's say tripulus or tonkat ali, which is used to like push testosterone. If you use them long term, you can get a crashing effect from them. Because they've been stimulating you for such a long time, then you crash. Whereas
if you stop, you crash.
Stop, you crash, right? And you need higher doses. Same thing with testosterone. If you stop, you crash. This is not like that. It's an adaptogen. It helps you adapt to the stress of low hormones and the high cortisol. So you can take it long term without any issues. Uh, the the going advice with any herb long term is you want to be like you want to be sensitive within your body. You want to know that it's doing you well long term, and also cycling it is a key guidance. We say if you're planning to take this long term, which if you're aging, that's definitely a must, in my opinion. Then you would do 5 days on, 2 days off, or you would do 30 days on, 10 days off. You would cycle them so that your body is still responsive to it. Because if your body says, hey, this is coming to me all the time, I don't need to react to it as much. That's what happens. But if it's getting periods of nothing, then it's actually reacting better with that. Think about one of the biggest trends right now is intermittent fasting. That's because you're giving your body a little bit of time not getting food. So it actually ends up metabolizing the food that you give it better. Same thing with anything that's long
Repairing, yeah.
term. Anything that's long term, that's adaptogenic, which is pollen. Part of that is give it a little break. Take 2 days off, take 10 days off if you're taking it 30 days.
That's interesting. Yeah. Okay. So do you do any laboratory testing, like let's say PSA, like prostate specific antigen, so before people, start this, or it's not even necessary?
It's not necessary. I've done a lot of testing. I do the Dutch test with patients where I look at like a lot of the hormones, and I've seen like the measurements change over time, and I've seen no change over time. So I don't use testing per se to use this, but if someone has got clear hormonal changes that I'm not confident on what to do, I always use some investigation before I actually come up with a plan,
as a baseline.
As a baseline to understand what's going on. I've looked at post-use levels of testosterone. I haven't seen a clear picture. I've seen patients go up in their testosterone, which is unexpected really for a phytoandrogen, because it's regulating your existing, it's making your existing testosterone more bioavailable and more work, and it's detoxifying your estrogens. But I've seen it go up, I've seen it stay the same, and I've seen the total testosterone staying the same and the free testosterone go up as well. So I've seen different patterns, and I've seen progesterone go up as well. But again, my experience is very limited with patients because I see maybe 10 or 15 patients a day. So it's not like a clinical study of 1,000 individuals. And also it's complex because I often use different things. I use the pollen. One of the best hacks you can do for yourself, for your hormones and testosterone, if you ask me, other than pollen, I have my favorite. I told you I have my favorite herbs, and pollen is one of them. Another one is saffron.
Saffron.
If you add saffron helps. It's one of the greatest anti-inflammatories. It's a mood regulator. It helps us testosterone. It helps serotonin. It's all around one of the best herbs that's out there. It's a really expensive herb, kind of like pollen, but good things don't come cheap in general. And saffron is a similar kind of process where like the stigmata needs to be removed. So like the same way we got to go into the woods, find patches of pollen, and then walk miles and miles to actually like bring that pollen on our back to the car to deliver it to the facility to process it. Saffron goes through like a very rigorous, similar kind of activity of like individually picking that stigmata. So it makes it a very expensive product, much like pollen, but it has the same bang for your buck as pollen would have on your health.
So, and again, going back to saffron, because that's really interesting. So what exactly
so
do you like it for?
So there's studies that shows that it improves testosterone levels.
Oh, it is as well.
Yeah,
interesting.
Yeah. So like usually what I drink in the morning is pine pollen in my black or green tea with some saffron and my Achilles heel, which is honey. I add a little bit of honey to that combination. But pine pollen and saffron in my tea every morning, every working morning is my routine of doing that. And I take a high dose for myself. I take the full 1.5 teaspoon of the powder on a daily basis.
Yeah, that's so fascinating, tapping into the you know, natural, I guess,
Pharmacopoeia of the
pharmacopoeia, yeah. So what
yeah
nature actually creates for us, right? So we don't
yeah
have to necessarily synthesize the chemical compounds, So if we use natural, so they always, in my opinion, safer. Like you compared, uh, pine pollen with carrots, So yeah, I mean, I guess you can measure vitamin A content in your blood, before and after eating X number of carrots, but it's all over the map, as you said, right? So that's why some of the tastings are not necessarily precise, because in the whole plant, so there's so many different additional constituents, cofactors, and other things that potentially
yeah
mitigate adverse even reactions compared to the synthesized,
yeah
vitamin A, for example, right? So
yeah.
versus carotenoids.
Unfortunately, a lot of the labs you can measure are pathological labs, are labs that show disease, right? There are few labs that show the state of health, and when you
Yeah,
sit down with
yeah.
it, ultimately your body is the best lab in terms of understanding, like your sense of well-being, your sense of energy, your sense of um, capacity is something that's intuitive, and that's the feedback. The main feedback we get with this product is after using it for a while, they notice if they go off it, they're like, I'm not the same. Or when they
It's
take it,
subtle,
it's
basically. Yeah,
subtle. It's
yeah.
subtle, but
Mhm.
it's potent, right? It's
Yeah.
a lot of the most potent things are subtle in the natural world, but it definitely
What did you
shines for that.
notice? Yeah.
Yeah.
What did you notice with yourself? Like, since you mentioned that you're on a relatively high dose, like with the pollen. So
With the
if you,
pollen,
let's say, yeah, if you stop, so like, what do you notice, and after how many days, let's say, you see the effect and also stop seeing that effect after you stop? I'm just curious.
yeah.
Since you have observational skills, as you mentioned, you have that intuitive sense, and understanding of your body. So, and you're a doctor, so.
Yeah, yeah. So for me, the first thing was the sleep quality and refreshing sleep. So the first thing I noticed was I could get away with half an hour less sleep. I tend to be a good sleeper. I need 9 hours, 8.5 hours to be my full self. And sometimes if I get 8 hours, I'm still groggy and my body's hurting and my brain is not sharp. And I could get away with 8 hours without having that aspect of grogginess and not sharpness. So that was the first thing I noticed for myself. And the other thing I noticed, obviously, was the libido aspect. I noticed my morning erections were stronger, and I had more thoughts of sex, which
Healthy.
which I didn't share with my wife, because if I had, she would have told me to stop taking it. But I continued to take it, and I've continued to take it because it does give me like that creative bounce, right? It's sexual energy is creative energy, and it really depends on how you challenge it, whether you channel it, whether you channel it in a direction of your creative life force and turn it into an improvement in your life, or you just directly go after the procreation side of things, is a choice of what you do with that energy. But when you don't have that energy, you don't have motivation, you don't have drive, you don't have follow through. There's a lot of things that we call it libido, but it's not just within the sexual act. It's that sexual drive that translates to a lot of these things. That's that motivation and accomplishment. So that's a hormone thing. Like if you're low in testosterone, you end up getting depressed, right? And depression goes with its own, like, yeah, it's low libido state, but it's a lot more than just that. So those are the two things I noticed for myself.
That's amazing. Wow. So yeah, it sounds like almost like a fountain of youth.
Literally fountain of youth just oozing out of the trees into the forest.
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah.
So that is fantastic. Well, it was a very interesting conversation, Dr. Saeid. Yeah, really appreciate you sharing your knowledge. So, and if any of our listeners interested in purchasing your product, they can do that through some of your websites, or if you can share how people
Yeah,
can
for sure.
find
Like,
you and your product.
the biggest channel that we made the product available is online, CanadianPinePollen.com. Since you're listening to this show, if you use Pollen Health 10, Pollen Health 10, that would be, you can use that as a code. You'll get 10% discount for the products. If you're an older individual, I would definitely recommend trying the tincture starting up. And if you're younger, the powder would be a best startup. And we, one of the things actually about our company is from the get-go, we said, like, if you're doing this, we want it to be something that has a positive impact on all levels, not just, this is a great product, let's go take it to our advantage from nature, but also let's give some back. So one of the things we do for everyone that signs up and orders a product, we actually plant a tree for every order that we get. So
I
one of the
love
cool, yeah,
that.
that's pretty cool. We got a pledge to hopefully plant 1 million trees in the wild. And that really means we have actually planted more trees up to date than we have harvested from. So that's just to give you an idea of how many trees we have planted. But if you order, for sure, CanadianPinePollen.com, we have a 2-day shipping policy. Unless you're like in a remote area or you got a PO box that's not accessible, it will get to you within 2 days. And again, Canadian Pine Pollen, and you can use Pollen Health 10 to get your discount on your first order. And give it a go for a couple of weeks. You will not be disappointed. That's for sure.
Wonderful. Wow. Thank you so much. Yeah, it's really remarkable what you guys have created, and helping people to get healthier, have more energy, vigor, youthfulness, and as you said, creative force. So, which is what life is all about.
Thanks so much. Thanks for having me, and thanks for giving me the time to actually share this with you. It definitely is exciting for me to share it because, like you said, it's a unique thing in the world of in the pharmacopoeia that we have. It's a unique offering, and it makes us happy, and that's really what keeps us going. The positive feedback we get from people, because sometimes we are a vertically integrated company. We do the harvest and we actually bring the product for sale. So sometimes being the farmer side, and it's tough. So getting a feedback saying, hey, thanks so much, and this helped me, and what we hear from clients online, and getting repeat customers, repeat clients that come back, that's definitely a heartwarming thing for us and keeps us going.
Well, yeah. And of course, as I said, I'm one of the clients of yours. So, and next time, I think I would like to have both of you and your co-founder, Andre, right? So, yeah. So maybe you can guys share with our listeners how you actually guys do it. It's like fascinating, the whole process. So,
for sure. He would be a great person to pitch in the back end of like, how does the harvest go? What are the stories we get during the harvest and the production? Actually, he does a lot of that dual extraction. He does the work, so he would be a good person to chat about that for sure.
To see the behind the scenes, so to speak. Yeah. So that sounds really interesting. Yeah. Well, yes, it was really good to have you here. So yeah, appreciate it. So, and thank you for joining us at Cures, Remedies, and Beyond, exploring science and the wisdom of health and healing. We hope to see you next time.